Welcome to another edition of Expanding Mind. I'm your host, Erik Davis, continuing the conversations about the cultures of consciousness. But this week I'm going to do something different. I'm not going to have a conversation, or you could say that I'm going to have a conversation with myself. I just got back from Burning Man. I hadn't been to Burning Man for almost a decade, for 9 years, until in 2009, just before I went off to get my PhD. And it was kind of a trip. And coming back, I thought, oh man, I really want to do something on the burn. And folks were still traveling, couldn't get a hold of people. And we had a conversation a few weeks ago with Mitch McNongo about the coyote on the burn. So it's already been in the air. But I thought I would indulge myself and just talk for an hour. It's something I've been thinking about doing because I do a lot of public speaking. And I often give talks with just, a few ideas and an hour of time. So I thought I would just reflect on this year's burn, on the Burning Man phenomena, and my own experience and attitude there. And perhaps it will be of interest to regular listeners of the show, including new folks who are coming in and checking it out for the first time. Just a reminder, of course, that I've been doing Expanding Mind for 8 years now, and there's a treasure trove of shows on prn.fm, which is where who hosts my show, but also on my own Technosis website, which also has tons of my own material. So head on over to Technosis, TECHGNOSIS.com. Check out past shows as well as a voluminous amount of material. I have been a busy boy. So before I talk about the 2018 Burning Man event with the iRobot theme and the inevitable mixture of confusion, exhaustion, glee, lust, insight, and existential miasma, I thought I kind of need to go through a little bit of my own past. And I'm a somewhat unusual burner in that I am a sort of guaranteed OG character, even though I was never really a burner in the capital B sense. I never thought of myself as a burner. I went to the event very early in its evolution, and as a kind of participant observation has been a major part of my life. I've been attracted to subcultures, but my relationship to them is to both participate in them, get to know the people I resonate with, enjoy the experiences, but also kind of have a reflective observational dimension, which is both kind of a blessing and a curse. It's made my life very interesting, but sometimes a bit not detached, but a bit confusing in terms of my identity. And that's been true of Burning Man as well, though in some ways it's been the most central or at least continuous reference point in my own subcultural journey, with the possible exception of psychedelics and the, admittedly, also possible exception of the Grateful Dead. So I'll just do a little, stroll through memory lane here. Give you a slice of ye oldie days of 1990s counterculture. In the early 1990s, I got online in, I think, 93, maybe 92. And, this was the pre-World Wide Web days, so you're logging in with a LO and typing little commands and getting listservs, and I spent a lot of time on Muds and Moos. And one of the listservs I was on was called Fringeware Review, and Fringeware Review was also a magazine, not dissimilar from Boing Boing. In fact, Boing Boing was also a magazine at that point, with a similar kind of layout and aesthetic, and then, of course, went on to be a very important online zone. This did not happen to Fringeware Review, but Fringeware Review was a similar kind of mixture of hacking culture, futurism, drugginess. It had a somewhat more metaphysical bent. There was more stuff about sort of Gurdjieff and mind mapping and curious approaches to topics like UFOs. I edited an issue with my friend Spiros Antonopoulos called Chaos Spirituality, which was a very kind of 1990s theme, that being the year of, or the era of the temporary autonomous zone, whose author, Hakim Bey, was himself kind of a proponent of a kind of chaos spirituality or chaos ontology. And that was very much how I first sort of grokked Burning Man when I finally got there. But I was very lucky because it was I think it was probably early 1994 when on Fringe World Review I got a notice of a art festival happening in Nevada in the end of the summer of 1994. And I was just happening, it was going to be, my girlfriend and I were going to be traveling in the area. We were considering moving out to the West Coast, and we thought we'd take a little a journey through the desert, which was not a particularly easy journey. You know, sometimes those early travel experiences with a loved one can get pretty wrangly and on the ropes. And so we were a bit frazzled by the time we showed up on the playa. We had spent some time in Vegas and had visited the Luxor, which at that point was new and seemed sort of millennialist and bizarre, this kind of pyramid structure with its esoteric kind of overtones, at least for those of us who study the Egyptian mysteries. So we followed the directions up through Gerlach and, went up the road past north of Gerlach for, 10, 15 miles. It was much farther away at that point. That's one of the great distinctions between the current Burning Man and for quite some time and ye olde days was that it was much farther out on the playa. So basically we pulled off the road, drove, couple hundred yards. There's a shack with a burning kind of Mad Maxy looking miscreant who took like $40, I think, from us, and or $40 each maybe, and said, "Okay, see that mountain there in the distance?" And we said, "Yeah, we see that mountain." He goes, "Okay, go 15 miles and take a right." So you just drove out on this open plain, and that was one of the most remarkable things about the early events was because you were so much farther out on the playa, so much farther away from the sort of familiar lines of the mountains. Now, today's event is nestled in a kind of V between these two mountain ranges, not very far away from Gerlach. If you can see the mountains at all, it's very easy to orient yourself. But back in the day, it was not so. One was let loose into this strange, abstract disorientation that was intensified by the fact that there were, of course, no road signs, confusing arrangements of lights, and a lot of more gruff, often intoxicated, sometimes highly intoxicated anarchists. And it was a very different event. It was much more about chaos. And we sort of kind of stumbled our way through the whole thing. It was marvelous, and we came back for the next couple of years. The next year in '95, I camped with a group called Spiral Oasis, and it was a group of tech heads. So it was some of the first real techie folks that were out on the playa, which at that point had a little beginnings of kind of a raver scene, and then the old school kind of post-punk industrialist welder, gritty anarcho types. And of course there were gun nuts. The famous drive-by shooting range was a sight to behold. Gentlemen and sometimes ladies armed to the teeth driving by in old Buicks and cut cars, blasting away at Barney the dinosaur or other stuffed creatures out on the desert. You could go to the local hot springs, et cetera, et cetera. One time my girlfriend, now wife, Jennifer, got lost. I think this was in '95. And she found, it was very easy to get lost. No road signs, no roads, no paths, no real pattern to the landscape. And she ran into, a Vulcan, a fellow dressed as Spock with Vulcan ears who behaved in a Vulcan manner and very methodically and volcanistically walked her in a spiral pathway from the very point where they met until she found her camp. Many marvels occurred. I wrote about the event in 1995 for the Village Voice. It had the great title of Terminal Beach Party, still, one of the best titles. I think I came up with it. It might have been my editor, but I think I did it. And that was a blast because it forced me to talk to more people than I would have talked to otherwise. On my own, I might have just hung out with whoever I was with and, chatted around. And I'm not super gregarious on my own. But if I'm a journalist, then I got to talk to everybody. So I talked to John Law, who was one of the main Cacophony Society folks who had worked with Larry Harvey to, put on the event. And in many ways, Cacophony Society is as much about the event as Larry Harvey and the building of the man, though Larry Harvey became the figurehead. So I got to talk to both of them, but especially made a connection with John Law. But I talked to the cops. I talked to the porta potty guys. There was at one point there were these feral mountain men who came out of the mountains, these sort of survivalist characters who were on ATVs, and they just came down out of curiosity. And I went up to them and I said, "So what do you think about all this?" And he didn't even look me in the eye, and he just said, "Different kind of weekend," which, is a fair assessment, So that was a fine old year. And at that point, I was done with writing about it. The whole tension between being a participant observer, being an anthropologist, writing, interviewing, journalistically reflecting on the event, and the fact that the event itself was screaming, experience, experience, experience. It was like the great injunction. Was to let go of that reflection, let go of those analytic frameworks, to immerse yourself, to fly, to be disoriented, to be confused, to discover, to let loose. And plenty of that happened as well, along with a lot of my, kind of virtual reality and proto sort of, Web 1.0 folks in my spiral environment were doing as well. The next year was one of the great pivot years of Burning Man, 1996, the notorious Hellco year. This was the year when, before the event, apparently very cool guy named Michael Fury died doing dangerous ass shit. And during the event, some ravers got run over in their tent. And it became clear that it was not a sustainable experience. The cars were everywhere. It was dangerous. There was exhaust everywhere. It was burning fuel everywhere. There were weapons everywhere. There was fires everywhere. And that was all very chaotic and very exciting, very transformational, although perhaps in a less linear way than people mean it today when they usually mean self-improvement. There it was transformational, more like you became some kind of other, that something else happened. Suddenly you were jumping over these burning, toxic, piles of fuel with your sneakers melting as like some howling, distorted voice screams through the crowd of crazy drums and catcalls and explosions. And, that was chaos. It was capital C chaos. It was not a city. It was not Black Rock City, and that's what it became. I didn't go for the next couple of years. I was writing Technosis. I needed to kind of retreat and recuperate. But it was in those years when, largely through Larry Harvey and the crew that was developing around him, that they kind of went for the city metaphor, that the way to organize this chaotic, creative explosion was to build a city. And that decision, of course, meant that some of the OG chaotes, like John Law, left the event. So that's why in 1996, I can't remember the official theme, but everybody remembers it as the year of Hellco, which is the idea that kind of Satan takes over Burning Man, and it was sort of a satire about consumerism and corporate sponsorship. McSatan's was a place to get your burger that year, and it was a somewhat terrifying year, though it contained much amusement as well. I'm almost positive that was the same year. The years blur, as you can imagine. That was the same year that we were about to watch one of the marvelous spectacles laid out by Pepe Ozan, who was one of the great early architects and sculpture artists of the Burning Man aesthetic. a sort of melty castle, demonic, erotic, surreal architecture that became that housed these operas or sort of performances that often occurred very, very late in the night after you'd been standing around for a very, very long period of time. But this one night it was happening, going on, and again, Jennifer and I were sitting there about to watch a performance, and this short fellow, actually a little person, I think a midget, came out all in S&M gear, and he was deeply intoxicated. And he stumbled along, which itself was a sight to be seen. He stumbled along, and then for some reason he could sense the warm cheeriness of my girlfriend, now wife, who was a much lovelier person than me, and could feel her sort of her presence, her vibe, and so he kind of stumbled her way and then passed out in her lap. So we watched the whole performance with a passed out S&M midget in Jennifer's lap. It's just an icon to recall. So after this sort of pact was made, I think one way of understanding Burning Man, and I think one way that I saw this year's event, is that a kind of a pact with the idea of the city was made. And so the city requires organization, it requires institutionalization, it requires different groups to manage different effects, it requires a kind of shared language of signs, of a roadmap, of literal signs, of services, and all of these enabled the event to keep going as it had to increasingly wrestle with the cops and the federal government, because of course it takes place except for 1997 on federal land. So there's always these institutional relationships, and by becoming a city, a temporary city, albeit, but a city nonetheless, there was a sort of logic that could be drawn from. And in many ways, what's happened is just the further unfolding of that pact, of that analogy, of the event as a kind of city. So the things that people have complained about as the event has changed and become more mainstream, become more visible, become more popular, become more institutionalized, become more cliched, become more predictable, but also become more intense, more richer, more elaborate, more expensive, more spectacular in the full sense of spectacle, in the ambivalent sense of spectacle, nonetheless still a spectacular experience, that all of these can be seen as, in a way, further unfoldings of the city, the idea of the city. And all cities are global cities now. All cities are digital cities now. All cities are technological hives now. And so in some ways, Black Rock City is just, in the current Black Rock City, is just more like a city than than it used to be when it was a more unique place, or a more strictly countercultural place. So I went again in '99 and went for the next 10 years. I could continue to stroll down memory lane, but I thought I'd pick out a few choice items, partly just to memorialize things. In 1999, with the Spiral folks, a lot of whom worked in the technology world, we put on a theatrical event, and theater will return in our story in a moment. DJ Christ Superstar, which was a EDM remix of Jesus Christ Superstar, with a lot of really remarkable. All the main cast members had excellent voices, and nobody else did, which was pretty impressive. It was a remarkable event. There were these marvelous sort of psychedelic religious Jews who were in the event, and we had this mystical Shabbats, and it was a strangely religious experience. And indeed, one of the major themes of my Burning Man life has been questioning, what is this? What in this is religious? What in this is not religious? How does Burning Man reframe and recontextualize what we mean by religion? And that, in some sense, has been my main question with the event, at least for a long time. And this was one stab at an answer. And we performed it one night. It was a remarkable event. We ended with walking off towards a 2001 type monolith out in the desert, and everybody who saw it was blown away, and nobody who didn't see it ever thought of it, which is some of the marvelous things about Burning Man. It's very difficult to, in fact, it's impossible really to review the event. You might be able to, report news about any particular event. You say what happened that year, or there was this, or there wasn't that. But as a reviewer, as a kind of cultural critic, as someone who is like a scene piece, it's extremely difficult to do because there's so much going on, even in those days when it was, the crowds were 20,000 or something like that, 25,000, 30,000 in the early 2000s. That there was so much going on that your own experience was largely dependent on, synchronicity, on luck, what you ran into, what happened to be happening when you were going by, maybe vaguely thinking about doing something else and then stumbling into some marvel or some horror or some stupidity or some marvelous stupidity. There's so many ranges of irony and sarcasm that can both redeem and sort of deconstruct the emotions and values of that event. It's quite unpredictable in that way, but it also makes it very hard to find your way. And so as an anthropologist, cultural critic kind of guy, I took the opposite path, which is that I didn't want to know anything about the event. I just wanted it to be like it just appeared magically, and I was just winding my way through. So I went out of my way to avoid getting to know any of the inner circle. I didn't know who any of the major artists were. I didn't become friends with anyone. I didn't join the big large teams that were building the increasingly charismatic art pieces, or the man himself, or the temple. I would go out there with my somewhat changing cast of characters, of friends and lovers and weirdos, and just have our fun, do our thing. And it wasn't until 2003, whose theme sort of appropriately was beyond belief. It was kind of the religious theme, if you will, where people kind of went down various mythological or religious paths in terms of their themes and costumes and art cars. It wasn't until 2003 that I decided to sort of bring my writerly, intellectual, reflective self back onto the playa, where I gave a talk. It was just about I think it was the first year where there was a space for lectures on the playa, which in some sense is kind of not a very playa-esque thing to do, at least in the old school framework. But I jumped in. It seemed like the appropriate thing. And so I gave my talk on Beyond Belief, the cults of Burning Man, in a whiteout. I was inside of I can't remember what they call them. There's a certain kind of hut, hexagonal hut, hexa hut or something, that had appeared on the playa that year. And I was giving my talk in that, and it was a total whiteout, and it was kind of remarkable. And in that audience was, which I only found out many years later, was a fellow named Mark Nichols. And later on, a number of years later, we got together and did another kind of theatrical riff on Burning Man, this time a rock opera called How to Survive the Apocalypse. And the idea came when Mark Nichols and his girlfriend Julie were waiting in line at a porta potty, which is something one does at Burning Man. And one could speak actually an entire episode about the porta potties at Burning Man, but I'm not going to do that because it's kind of gross. Anyway, they're waiting there at the porta potty, and this couple in front of Mark and Julie, Ron Miner, and I can't remember who he was with, said something along the lines of the only art form that could capture Burning Man with all of its multiplicity, its sounds and sights, its locations, its characters, its costumes, its ecstatic states, its depraved states, its depressed states, its lack of sleeping states. He said the only art that could capture Burning Man is opera. And Julie said, turned to him and said, "Hey, well, my boyfriend writes operas," because Mark Nichols, while he has done work in rock and roll, in popular songwriting, also has written large-scale musicals that, while not operas in the traditional classical sense of the term, go beyond show tunes, go beyond Broadway. And from that little encounter, the seed was planted that eventually grew into the Burning Opera. I was brought in about not too many, a couple months after that, because some of the inner Burning Man people knew me as a writer and as someone who had had creds from back in the day and was apparently a nice guy. And so the opera began. And the reason I'm kind of mentioning that, I'm going to actually play a track or two from the opera, was that it has to do directly with why I went back to Burning Man, because without telling any more of the stories of what happened in, 04, 05, 06, 07, well, actually, I'll stop and talk about 07, because that really helps explain the growing boredom I had with the event. So 2007, we were camped, and then I'll get back to the Burning Opera. In 2007, we were camped with the fire truck crew. So we had a fire truck, which meant that it was a fire truck, classic sort of red pumper, I think they called them, where it was the water hose one. Except this fire truck actually spit fire. So it was a fire truck, like a truck with fire on it, with a flamethrower, basically. So there we are on Monday night of the event, tooling around in the fire truck, and the eclipse, the partial lunar eclipse was on. So the moon looked like a burnt orange planet from some 1970s science fiction paperback hanging there in the sky. And then someone goes, "Hey, the man's burning." And we're like, "No, you're hallucinating. No, it's burning." And we look, and indeed, the man was on fire. And so then we raced towards the burning man in a fire truck, which was pretty funny and strange, because the man was indeed on fire. And as folks who know Burning Man lore know all too well, there had been an act of, I guess, what you'd have to call technically arson that night, although in my own mind, that's not the right word. I think the right word, to find the right word, we have to turn back to Hakim Bey, author of the Temporary Autonomous Zone Taz book, which in many ways formed the most obvious and most helpful cognitive template to understand the early roots of Burning Man as a pre-urban chaos event. Another phrase from Mr. Bey is the idea of poetic terrorism. That's a little edgy phrase there. Terrorism, we don't, we're kind of scared of that. Even the radicals probably don't really like the term terrorism very much. But poetic terrorism, what could that possibly be? In any case, Paul Addis's somewhat maniacal act of burning the man proved to me a window into how much my own mind and interests and sensibility had drifted, not only from the Burning Man organization, whose kind of investment in having the event go off as they want to plan it makes a lot of sense, as well as the crews that actually built the man and have put in their effort and energy, et cetera, et cetera. Because the question was the next morning, as the rumors went around and what happened and is what are they going to do? What do you do? You're Burning Man. You're this crazy organization. There's nothing like you. You're like a art festival. You're like a crazy rave. You're like a pagan gathering. You're like a postmodern Mad Max spectacle. What do you do when there's this act of arguably arson or arguably poetic terrorism? So what do you do? And the decision, of course, went out that they were going to rebuild the man, and so the man building crew went out and rebuilt the man. And the opportunity to explore what it meant for the central icon, the kind of brand of this particular wash your own brain cult went up in smoke. It was as if the institutional logic of making sure that things happen the way they were supposed to happen took over. And that was not altogether surprising and not altogether bothersome to me. But what was disturbing to me were how few people exulted in that moment. Because to be honest, even though Paul Addis did a dangerous thing, even though people could have gotten hurt, even though he took it upon himself to destroy something that an organization and that other builders had put a lot of effort into, even though he was potentially taking away the sort of creme de la creme moment of tens of thousands of people who were going to go to the event, were paying good money to get their Dionysian rocks off. Nonetheless, riding on that fire truck towards the Burning Man under the burnt orange moon was the first time in years that I smelled again the ancient chaos that I had felt in the 1990s. And whether or not that's, appropriate, inappropriate, politically okay, whatever, I can't deny that exultation, that glee, that sense of the marvelous incarnate. And so I was very surprised when speaking to people throughout the next few days how few people tasted that. And so I could tell at that point that maybe the reasons that people were doing this and my own reasons, and perhaps just my own attachment to my past, had sort of come to kind of a breaking point or a sort of letting go period. But even as I let go of the event, I went a couple more years before I stopped. I became involved in this burning opera thing. But what was cool about the burning opera was it was never designed to take place on the playa. Instead, it was a kind of vehicle to communicate Burning Man to the outside world and through the medium of rock opera. And you can say the story, the vibe, the music was kind of a cross between Jesus Christ Superstar, previously mentioned, Hair, and Rocky Horror Picture Show. And it was a story of, a couple newbies go to the playa, start to fight, they get split up. He goes off and has a dark night of the soul. She kind of discovers her own power. And in the meantime, we get a kind of flashback to the 1990s and the early, the origin story of the event, how it begins on Baker Beach in San Francisco. The cops come. They discover this ancient lake in Nevada, northwestern Nevada, and they take the event out there. And it goes through its chaotic period until there's sort of a split in the road, and the kind of culminating conflict of the origin story in the opera is between Larry Harvey and John Law, or what we called the Hat and Mustachio. So actually, I want to play a couple tracks from it. Mark Nichols is a brilliant composer, and the music and the event were quite spectacular. The people who saw it, we did a couple versions of the show, one in 2008, one in 2009. And then there was another version in Los Angeles that I was not directly involved in, but was also marvelous. And the people who saw it really quite loved it. And I was very happy that even grizzled, jaded, cynical burners, much more grizzled, jaded, and cynical than myself, mostly were extremely pleased with what we had done, because I was able to take my, as the librettist, I was able to take my anthropological subcultural journalist skills and boil them down into songs that kind of represented different angles on the event, different types of characters, the fluffy raver types, the drunken DPW types, the mystic hippies, the horny drag queens, the crazed exuberant clown-like characters that would fill the Esplanade on a Friday night. So it was a very wonderful experience overall. So I want to play 2 tracks. First is the song Gypsy Dogs, which opens the show and has a kind of a little melancholic riff on the reasons that so many people came to the Playa and continue to come to the Playa. Just something to do with a certain kind of homelessness that I think we can all identify. So here is Gypsy Dogs from How to Survive the Apocalypse.
We rose up from the wreckage, we moved like gypsy dogs. We're hunting for something we can call home. Oh, 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 oh. We wrote the writing on the wall, we scraped the barrel dry, we forged the wrenches for the monkeys to throw. Oh, 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 oh.
We lost ourselves in the city, we turned away from the crowd, we plunged through the nighttime, horny and stoned. The dust was dry as acid, the night was smooth as skin. We heard our hearts pounding through the day.
From the wreckage, we moved like gypsy dogs. We're hunting for something we can call home.
So that was Gypsy Dogs, the tune that opens How to Survive the Apocalypse. And part of the reason that I'm spending time talking about the opera, I mean, it's not very well remembered. It's not. We made a DVD and we made a CD, and they kind of went out, and nothing really happened. There's clips on YouTube. Not that many people watch it, which is actually okay by me, because for me, a lot of the spirit of Burning Man is the spirit of the moment, and putting a huge amount of work into one event that is extraordinarily evanescent and is a marvel to those who see it and essentially meaningless or non-existent to those who were not there. For me, there is a extraordinary beauty to that in our era of like infinite recording and, stuffing your CV and just having all these references and all of these things that live eternally in digital space. I think is very important value to keep in mind as an artist, as someone who's producing things in the world. It's one of the reasons I often don't record my talks, which I do spontaneously. So, people go, "Hey, what was that great thing you said?" And I'm like, "I don't remember. I was riffing. I'm not in control. I don't know." And it's recordings are good. I record too. I'm no purist. If Burning Man teaches you anything, it's about not being a purist. Nonetheless, the other reason that I'm talking about How to Survive the Apocalypse is that the producer of the opera was a woman named Dana Harrison, who was well known inside the inner circle of the Burning Man folks. She had come to the event in the very late 1990s after being a hot shot at in corporate San Francisco, working for Charles Schwab, working for, I think, Bank of America. She was already a deadhead, already a world traveler, already a remarkable woman. And she signed the checks. And even as she was signing the checks, she just encouraged Mark and I and Christopher Fooling, who was the director and helped write the story and craft this event. Just let us go, And it was the same spirit that she had brought to the cafe, and folks who have been to Burning Man know that the kind of Center Camp Cafe is sort of the hub of the wheel. And she had run that place for a long time. And she actually did a lot of significant things for the event, which I only found out about later. She helped get their finances in order. She helped create a modern ticketing system based somewhat on the Grateful Dead ticketing system when the event became more and more popular. And she also wrangled with the BLM when the BLM was trying to ram extraordinary fees down Burning Man Org's throat, and she was like, "This is bullshit." And she had the chutzpah and the smarts and the institutional authority and just the, well, as she would put it, the balls to take these guys on. And so she brought that energy and that commitment to community and creativity and transformation to the Burning Opera. And all this is a roundabout way of saying that she died earlier this year. And so I went to Burning Man this year after not being there for almost a decade and not really caring very much, frankly, most of the time. A little bit of FOMO on if I could have a transporter, I would have put myself there. But this year I went for dead people, for Larry Harvey, for John Perry Barlow, or both folks I knew but not well, for my good friend Dale Pendle, who's been on this show, an extraordinary entheobotanist, philosopher, poet, but mostly for Dana. And so I went to remember the dead at the temple, and which is a funny reason to go to a exhausting, crazy party out in the desert. And I had a lot of fun as well. And I feel like I should rattle off some responses, having not been there for almost a decade. There were some things that I sort of expected. I was not surprised by the visible Instagram culture, the kind of selfie culture. There were selfie sticks. There was that kind of vibe of posing in front of objects and capturing for the sort of circulation of narcissistic images through the internet. That was pretty predictable. Although it led to a funny moment, because I think one of the dynamics of Burning Man art and why that it doesn't really work outside of the playa most of the time. Some pieces do translate. It's not so much just because it needs to be in the desert, or you need to be high as a kite, or whatever, or the dust or something. It's that the logic of Burning Man is this kind of quest for wonder. No matter what you're doing, you're sort of partly on some quest that gets interrupted by some other thing. And a lot of the art functions in this following sense. You look in the distance and you see some wonder. What is that? Is that a magical castle? Is that a strange elephant? Is that a witch's hut? And then you go towards it and you're drawn toward it. It pulls you out of this whole chaotic realm of possibility, all these lights flashing, all these appearances, all these possible worlds, all these portals. But no, I'm going to head towards this one because it caught my eye. And then somewhere along that way, almost inevitably, not always, but almost inevitably, you go, oh, it's just this. And some people are standing around smoking, and there's some LEDs and two by fours and some, tape and shit. And you're like, oh my God, that was it. But that whole thing, the art is not the object. The art is the whole process that your psychology went through. And my version of that this year was stumbling across what I thought of as a satanic throne out in the desert, out in the in the playa area. It was a platform with a central throne with two big horns on the kind of upper parts of the throne, an upside down pentagram before it, an upside down pentagram I think on the throne, and then there were these other sculptural objects to the side. And in my mind, I'm like, wow, that's great. I mean, I've been like tracking religion out here for a long time, and I've seen, witch circles, spiral dances, OTO Gnostic masses. I've seen a lot, voodoo rituals. I've seen a lot of weird shit out here, but I've never seen a proper satanic ceremony. So I'm like, yeah, the Church of Satan's in the house, or whoever was doing it. And so I kept coming back because I wanted to see like what was happening. So one afternoon I come by, and there are these like, bless their hearts, but they're these sort of like pasty kind of sci-fi nerd couples in bondage gear, waiting to get their photographs taken on the sort of rack beside the satanic throne. And there's another woman who's clearly kind of was sort of the organizer of the space, where she was sort of telling them how to pose, and then somebody else was taking the photograph, and then they would go off. This was very much the D&D to B&D crowd. And then another sort of couple would come on and get described, and then there was this picture taken. And the sense of deflation that occurred in my own imagination was, let's say, instructive. In many ways, Burning Man is just, again, more like another city. So you see the same symptoms of the same delirium and degeneration and weirdness that's happening in the rest of the culture. The music as well was somewhat underwhelming. And I've been to a lot of other EDM festivals that have a lot of tasty music. I've never really understood why Burning Man generally has such bad music. There's marvelous exceptions, of course, but overall, it's very unexperimental. But and I missed some of the big art. Like, most of the art was okay. I saw a few things, but the big fancy thing was this drone. These programmed drones that would move to mimic murmuration, those marvelous clouds that swallows form, that kind of sentient crowd effect, which sounded, properly posthumanly creepy, and reminded us that Burning Man is very much embedded in a sort of crazy wing of the military technological digital takeover of reality, and that it's sort of a weird petri dish of a kind of R&D lab for posthumanism, not always intentionally, which is what the paranoid conspiracy theorists think, but there we are in the Silicon Valley's backyard, and so the iRobot theme definitely had brought up the volume on the transhumanist potential here, but it often fell sort of flat. There was a lot of dorky robots, and there was this big orb called the Orb that hung there, and it was supposed to reflect or do something, but it was covered with dust, so it just sort of looked like the weird, like it looked kind of like the orb in The Prisoner, which gave it a bit of a little bit of a paranoid Phil Dickian twist. And when I brought my car in today, the van I took to the event, the Mexican Americans who were washing it gave a smirking response, which, because they had been dealing with these cars all day. And I'm there, I'm like picking up my hat with like a Hare Krishna symbol on it, and this big octopus, and this other like weird junk and LED lights that I had, and I felt kind of foolish, and I could see how sort of silly the event can appear, and how routinized it is, how hashtagged it is. And I can be cynical about it. I can be jaded about it. And yet, despite the fact that some of my fears were fulfilled by my, fellow quote unquote burners, by some of the quality of the event, et cetera, nonetheless, I came back very heartened, and the reason is simply the temple. There's nothing like the temple on the planet. The temples, of course, appeared in, I can't remember the first year now, early 2000s, somewhat serendipitously, but soon became established as one of the most important spaces on the playa, the place where people go to remember their dead. And people put in shrines, they write notes, and then the night after the man himself is burned on Sunday night, the temple is burned. It's not always been on Sunday night, but let's just go with it. And you know, it's a remarkable experience to be in a crowd of tens of thousands of people who are almost entirely silent watching a building burn. This year, many of the temples have been done by David Best. This year was another artist whose name I should have looked up, a French architect. It was a beautiful building. And I spent a lot of time there meditating in front of Dale's memorial and in front of Dana's memorial. One night I dressed up as the bunny character I played in the Burning Opera, so I'm like this grizzled bunny with a bullhorn. And I went there and I got into lotus position and, you know, meditated for 2 hours with burning incense, and it was a very strange experience. All these different layers and levels of my time there, because it had been so long since I had been there that like I was remembering all the different years that I had been there in different random ways. So it felt like a kind of trans-temporal playa that I had found myself inside. But the thing about the temple is that I think it's about 75% of people in Black Rock City say they have no religion. So it is a religious place for the non-religious. Maybe it's not a religious place. Maybe it's a sacred place. Maybe it's not a sacred place. Maybe it's a place of memory, of the scream of absence, of the haunting quality of memory and of appearance, of pure appearance. The pure appearances that we are, that art is, that time is, that objects are, and that fire is. And you know, in the end, like for me, that any attempt to write off Burning Man as an important part of global culture, as a symptomatic but also creative, innovative, and still deeply weird and oftentimes sarcastic in a very good way expression of our contemporary cultural environment. But in addition to that, even more importantly than that, is the temple, is that there is a way to remember, to weave in our grief, our longing, our loss together without a God, without a church, without an organized structure. And then in the very act of serving that up, all of those beautiful memories, books people made, art, shrines, all of this stuff given into the maw of the fire was really an extraordinary event. So I think in memory of Dana, I'd like to just play one more tune from the Burning Opera. I choose this one because in addition to her magnificent personality, she was a collector, a hoarder of costumes from her world travels, from costume shops, from opera sales. And one of the most fun songs in the Burning Opera is called Inside Out, is about the role of costume, seemingly the most superficial of human expressions, the role of costume out in the playa and how it actually points to some of the deepest dynamics. So I'm going to leave you with this tune, Inside Out. I hope you've enjoyed this unconventional expanding mind. And until next week, keep your minds open.
It used to be a desert out here, a low red look of khaki,
denim and scruff,
But then the drag queens came.
and fabulosity reigned.
feather boas and parasols,
Lingerie and stilettos.
rubber thongs and vermilion lace.
Perversion and grace. leopard stockings and Chinese robes.
A menagerie of cheap shades.
Bones in your nose.
You know anything goes out here.
Anything goes
Out here. Purple pedenda dingling dongs.
hippy dippy beads and formal gowns.
Thigh-high boots and fairy wings.
Playboy robes and vinyl skirts.
So short they lived on their own.
Red hot pennies on Santa Claus.
Strap on for Jesus H. Christ.
Accessories for the body and mind.
So the body won't mind you at all.
Accessories for the body and mind.
So the body won't mind you at all. Every man and woman, every guy and girl
And tranny and tomboy and Ulster running wild.
is a blinky, blinky star. Strutting out on this dusty stage, shining out on this dusty stage. Inside is out, outside is in. But the costume that you wear is your marvelous, ridiculous, maniacal, lascivious, ostentatious, dream-time skin.
Every man and woman, every kind girl,
Tranny and tomboy, Ulster running wild, is a blinky, blinky star. Shining out.
from this dusty void, calling out in this dusty void.
A romper room of mystics out here. Alien angels and beasts.
Devils and gods,
Halloween for the horny and high.
and fabulously hot.
Porn clowns and bunny boys.
Pirates, vampires, cupcakes.
From the heights of freakiness, you have reached into the breach.
You as you never have been.
Cause you never really know who you really are. Till you manifest your avatar. That's right, baby. Till you manifest your avatar.
Every man and woman, every guy and girl
And tranny and tomboy, one Ulster running wild.
is a blinky, blinky star. Strutting out on this dusty stage, shining out from this dusty stage. Inside is out, outside is in. The costume that you wear is your marvelous, ridiculous, maniacal, lascivious, ostentatious, dream-time skin.
Every man and woman, every kind girl,
Tranny and tomboy, Ulster running wild, is a blinky, blinky star. Shining out from this dusty void, calling out in this dusty void. Inside is out,
outside is in.
the costume that you wear is your marvelous, ridiculous, maniacal, lascivious, ostentatious,